Hi everybody. Welcome to our channel, The Scary Tales. Our scary and horror stories are designed to send chills down your spine. Enjoy the spine-tingling stories thrill. Here's your horror stories about Motel. 1. The room that was never booked. A man driving cross-country, exhausted from his travels, pulls into a rundown motel at midnight. The place is eerily quiet, with no other cars in the parking lot. When he checks in, the clerk seems oddly distant, and there's a strange chill in the air. He's given room 13, a number that seems too unlucky to be real. When he enters the room, it's empty except for a large antique mirror that dominates the wall. He feels uneasy but brushes it off. As he looks into the mirror, he begins to notice shadows moving behind him in the reflection. The longer he stares, the more the figures become clearer, figures that are not in the room with him. He turns around, but the room is still empty. Terrified, he bolts out of the room and asks the clerk to change rooms. The clerk tells him there's no such room as room 13. When he checks his key, it reads room 13, and the motel's register shows no record of his booking. 2. The motel on the edge of town. A couple, on their honeymoon, decide to stop at an isolated motel after a long day of driving. The place is off the beaten path, surrounded by dense woods. The manager, an elderly woman, welcomes them but seems too insistent on getting them settled quickly. She warns them not to leave the motel grounds after dark. The couple, intrigued but dismissive of the warning, head to their room. As night falls, strange noises echo from the woods, followed by eerie whispers just outside their window. They dismiss it as animals, but things escalate when they hear footsteps on the roof. Terrified, they try to call the manager, but the phone line is dead. When they venture outside to find her, the elderly woman's body is found hanging in the trees, her eyes wide open, staring at them. The couple races to leave but finds that the motel is surrounded by an impenetrable fog, trapping them inside until dawn. 3. The Phantom Motel. A man, tired from his business trip, drives down a desolate highway and spots a small, old motel lit with flickering neon lights. He's far from any other town and decides to stop for the night. The manager, an odd but polite middle-aged man, gives him a key to a room at the far end of the motel. As the man enters his room, he notices an old journal left on the bedside table. Curious, he flips through it, only to find entries describing events eerily similar to his own experience, all written by previous guests who had stayed in the same room. The last entry is chilling, they never leave. Later that night, he hears whispers in the hall and opens his door to investigate. The motel seems to have no end, and the hallway stretches endlessly. Desperate to escape, he tries to leave but finds that no matter which door he opens, he is always back in the same room. When he finally manages to escape in the morning, he drives off, only to find the motel vanishing in his rearview mirror, as if it never existed. 4. The Vanishing Guest. A man on a solo road trip stops at a remote motel, drawn by its welcoming lights. It's late, and the lobby is empty, save for a lone figure behind the counter, a young woman who gives him a key to room 4. She smiles politely but warns him not to stay out too late and not to interact with the other guests. Curiosity piqued, he asks about the other occupants but she becomes unusually defensive and tells him to enjoy his stay and rest. That night, after some restless sleep, the man hears voices in the hallway, loud, cheerful chatter, and laughter. When he opens the door to see who else is around, the hallway is completely empty. The next morning, when he checks out, the clerk asks if he met any of the other guests. He mentions the voices and the laughter from the night before. The clerk's face falls, and she explains that the motel hasn't had any other guests for years. The guests were all previous visitors who vanished under mysterious circumstances. The young woman behind the counter had been missing for decades. 5. The Motel's Curse. A weary traveler arrives at a secluded motel after a long journey. The manager, an older gentleman, seems friendly but warns him that the motel is cursed. The traveler laughs it off and pays for a room. However, strange things begin happening immediately. The lights flicker, the door locks by itself, and an unsettling feeling of being watched lingers in the air. As the night progresses, the traveler starts hearing whispers coming from the vents. Desperate to understand what's going on, he ventures into the motel's basement. There, he discovers a room covered in dust and cobwebs, with old photographs of past guests. All the faces are scratched out, except for one. The photograph shows the manager, but with an unsettlingly vacant expression. The manager's voice suddenly echoes through the basement, and the traveler turns to see him standing at the top of the stairs, grinning. Before the traveler can escape, the manager warns him that the curse is about to claim him, just as it has claimed everyone before. The man tries to flee but is found the next morning, his face scratched out from all the photos. 6. The Last Motel on the Highway. A couple on a late-night drive pulls into an old, rundown motel located on an abandoned stretch of highway. The place looks abandoned, but the lights are on and a sign reading "Vacancy" is still illuminated. They check in and receive a key to a room at the back. When they settle in, they notice that the motel seems oddly quiet, with no other cars in sight. The couple begins to explore the motel, only to realize that the walls of the building seem to stretch impossibly long. Every time they try to return to their room, they find themselves in a completely different part of the motel, one they've never seen before. Desperately searching for a way out, they find a door that leads into the parking lot, but as they step outside, they realize they're back on the highway. The road is now covered in thick fog, and the sign that read "Vacancy" now says "No exit." They try to run, but every turn they take leads them back to the motel. In the end, they disappear without a trace, and the motel's sign flickers once more, awaiting its next guests. 7. The Motel on the Cliff. A couple on a weekend getaway decides to stay at a remote motel perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The view is breathtaking, but something about the place feels off. The manager is an elderly woman who doesn't speak much, simply handing them a key and directing them to room 7. The couple arrives, and after a quiet dinner, they retire to their room. That night, they hear strange noises, a tapping sound, almost like fingernails scratching at the window. When they pull back the curtains, they see nothing but the dark abyss of the cliffside. The noises continue throughout the night, growing louder and more frantic. By morning, the couple is on edge, but when they check out, the manager warns them to stay far from the edge of the cliff. As they leave, they spot a row of faded photographs on the wall behind the counter, showing previous guests smiling in front of the motel. But in every single photo, there's one common detail: the guests are all standing just a few steps from the cliff's edge, and in each photo, one person's face is missing. They ask the manager about it, but she only whispers, "They didn't leave." 8. The Echoing Room. A man driving late at night through a rainstorm pulls into a small, old motel that seems to be the only one for miles. The clerk is strange, offering him a room with an unsettlingly cold handshake. He checks in and is given room 9, but something feels wrong. As he enters, he notices the walls are covered in old, faded wallpaper, and the room smells like mildew. That night, while lying in bed, he hears soft whispering voices, as if someone is speaking just outside the door. He opens it, but no one is there. The whispers continue all night, growing louder and clearer, until finally, he hears his own voice calling out to him from the hallway. Frightened, he checks the mirror, and there he sees himself standing in the hallway, staring back at him with a blank, expressionless face. Panicked, he locks the door, but the whispers become screams. By morning, he's gone. The room is still empty, but the whispers never stop, echoing through the motel. 9. The Motel Room with No Key. A woman, exhausted from a long drive, pulls into a motel after sunset, desperate for a place to rest. The owner, a middle-aged man, greets her with a warm smile but tells her that there's only one room available, room 2. He hands her the key with a strange, cryptic warning: "Don't open the second drawer." She's puzzled but brushes it off as odd, small-town superstition. That night, as she tries to settle in, curiosity gets the best of her, and she opens the second drawer in the room's nightstand. Inside, she finds an old, tattered journal with a single, terrifying entry written inside: "They're watching me. I'm next." The entry is dated just one day before her arrival. The woman immediately gets a bad feeling and decides to leave. When she heads to the lobby, she finds the motel is completely empty. The lights are all off, and there's no sign of the owner. She goes outside, but as she looks around, she realizes the parking lot is full of old, abandoned cars. She goes back to her room, and the second drawer is now empty. When she tries to leave again, the front door of the motel locks behind her, and the sound of a slow, shuffling footstep begins to echo through the halls. 10. The Silent Motel. A man traveling through a desolate area at night pulls into a small, secluded motel. The place looks clean and well-maintained, but there's an eerie silence that hangs in the air. The front desk clerk is silent and doesn't speak when handing him the key to room 12, just gesturing toward the hallway. The man feels uneasy but decides to rest for the night. As he lays in bed, he notices the sound of someone quietly walking through the hallway outside his door, but when he peeks through the peephole, there's no one there. This continues throughout the night: footsteps, whispers, and the rustling of something faintly moving just outside. The man decides to leave in the morning, but when he tries to check out, the clerk still remains silent and only nods in acknowledgement. As the man drives away, he notices that every room has its lights on, but no one seems to be inside. After a few miles, he spots a sign saying, "Next motel 12 miles ahead." Confused, he turns around to find the motel gone, the area now empty, and only the sound of footsteps in the distance. The end.